Hi traders, welcome to the anatomy of a script presentation. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the core structure of your scripts. So this is basically just the general template that most scripts will follow. Let's get started. Now, the very first thing or the very first line of code that will be in your script is a heading comment. I'll break down exactly what that is in the next slide. The next section of your code will be what is called a annotation function. So this annotation function will define what type of script you are writing. Is it an indicator script? Is it a strategy tester script? Or is it a library script? And don't worry, we'll cover all of these throughout the course, but those are the three options we have to choose from when creating a TradingView script. The next thing I personally like to do in my code after I've established these two things or written out these two things is get user input. So I like to get the script settings and user input from the users of my script at the very start of my script. You don't need to do that. You can get user input technically anywhere in your code, but I like to get it at the start of the script. I like to keep all of my inputs together so that it makes it easier to modify them or add new ones, and it just keeps them organized. Next, after you've got all of your user input, then we can start performing our calculations and our analysis. So this could be analyzing market conditions, detecting candlestick patterns, analyzing indicators, all of that sort of thing. And once we've performed our analysis, then we need to plot our outputs to the chart. So for example, if you're detecting candlestick patterns, maybe you will want to highlight on your chart when those candlestick patterns occur in a visual manner. And then finally, I like to trigger any alert conditions or manage my strategy trades, my tester trades towards the end of my script when I can. Now, this isn't always possible. Sometimes you'll need to manage your strategy trades in the middle of your script somewhere, and maybe you'll need to generate alerts sometimes in the middle of your script. But where possible, I like to trigger all of my alerts and manage my trades at the end of my script. It's normally the very last thing that I do after drawing my analysis onto the chart. So what you see right there are the basic building blocks of a script. Now, for those of you who are new to coding, I'll break down what each of these mean and what they are, what they do over the next few slides. So first up, what are heading comments? This is your copyright, your disclaimer, your license comment. So we'll cover what comments are later in the course, but basically a comment is just a line of code that doesn't get executed. It's purely for human eyes only. It's just for you to leave notes in your script. And one of the comments that are automatically generated when you create a new blank script is your copyright and your disclaimer, or Mozilla public license. We'll also go over that in a future lesson. But basically, by default, all TradingView scripts are covered by the Mozilla public license, which protects you from people suing you. For example, if perhaps you made a mistake in your code and your code leads to someone losing money or something, the responsibility is actually on the user of your script to do their own due diligence and protect themselves from any danger or risk. And all of that information is contained in the first line of code of your script. The next thing that I like to personally include in my scripts, especially my more complicated ones, is a script version number and the last time and date that I modified the code. This is more for myself so that I can just keep track of the development of my scripts, but it's also useful for other traders so that they can see how old your script is, and that might explain certain aspects of your script. For example, if there's an update to the Python script language and TradingView include a new feature or functionality to Python script and your script doesn't take advantage of that, it might be because it was created before that feature even existed, and having a last modified date on your script can help other traders who might read your code better understand the context that your script was written in. The next thing I like to include is a author, so my name or my online alias or company name, etc., or something like that. By default, TradingView do include your TradingView username in the copyright comment, but if you want to, you can include your full name in your code, and that can help build your reputation in the trading community if that's something you're interested in doing. It's important to mention that you cannot put links in your script. I learned this the hard way. I had a couple of scripts get delisted from TradingView because I didn't read the house rules, and in the house rules it says that you cannot include links to your social media or website in your public script code. So if you publish your scripts, Make sure that you don't include any URLs in the code, otherwise your script will be moderated and removed from the platform. The next thing that I like to include in my scripts, if necessary, is credit to others. So if I've borrowed code from another programmer or another trader, I like to include credit to that trader in my heading comment and just mention their username or their real name if I know it, and maybe even the script that I borrowed an idea or code from. And in programming, borrowed is a euphemism for stealing. It's okay to steal code, especially TradingView code, since it's an open source language. Just make sure you credit people. The final thing that is important to include in your heading comment is the compiler version directive. Now, this phrase is just a fancy way of saying you need to tell PineScript which version you are using, which version of the language you are using. So as of recording this, PineScript and TradingView, the team behind PineScript, have just released version 5 of the language. And so all of my new scripts now contain the compiler version directive that points the TradingView system, the engine that runs my code, to version 5 of PineScript. And that dictates what syntax I can use, what features I can use. And so it's an extremely important thing to include in your scripts. The compiler directive is included automatically when you create a new script, so you don't need to worry about this. But if you accidentally remove it or change the number, you will break your script. Moving on, we have the annotation function. So similar to the compiler directive, which tells TradingView, the engine that runs our scripts, what version of PineScript we want to use, we also need to tell it what type of script we are writing. So there are 3 different types, as I mentioned. We have indicator scripts, strategy scripts, and library scripts. The most commonly used one, the one that you will probably use the most, because that's what most coders use, is the indicator version of a PineScript. Most of these script types have access to all of the same features, but there are a few important nuances between them. For example, an indicator script cannot execute strategy testing code, and a library is far more advanced. We'll cover that towards the end of the course. Library scripts have very different rules to both indicator and strategy scripts. But a strategy script can use nearly all of the features of an indicator script. An indicator script cannot use some of the features of a strategy script, but we'll cover that in future lessons. The purpose of the annotation function, other than just defining what type of script you're writing, is also to title the script. So you can assign a title to your script using this annotation function. You can also define your chart parameters, for example, your decimal precision, which scale you want to draw on. So we've got the left and right scale on your price chart. You can tell your indicator to draw to the left scale if you want to. You can change the precision. You can also define the overlay type. So you can choose to draw over the top of price action or into your own box. The easiest example of this to offer you is moving averages, draw over price action. The RSI indicator or stochastics draw into their own box. Obviously, you can draw an RSI over price action if you want to, but PineScript has included this overlay type parameter so that we can dictate where our visual signals draw into their own box or onto our price chart. That's the purpose of the annotation function. We'll cover that in more detail when we get into the actual coding lessons of this course. But let's move on to getting user input. So I think it is very good practice to provide input settings on all of your scripts. If you're not publicly publishing your script, it doesn't matter, obviously. If it's just for you, you can do what you want. But if you're publishing it to the public TradingView library, script library for other people to use, I think it's good practice to provide as much input settings as you can within reason. You don't want to overwhelm your script users with too many settings, but anything that's important in your script, such as a moving average length, an indicator period length, and anything else that affects the way that your script detects patterns or analyzes price action, should have its own user input where possible. For example, here is my ultimate pullback indicator. This script does a lot of different things, and I've included user settings for nearly every functionality or feature of the script so that the user has full control over basically every parameter that the script employs in its analysis process. Now, obviously the purpose of providing user input settings is to allow for customization of your script. Now, this really only applies to public scripts, especially scripts that you charge money for down the line. You are allowed to charge money for your Pine scripts if you create a script that is highly valuable. But if you do that, I think it's a great practice to make sure you have full customization functionality in your script. You should include flexible options that require no coding experience so that someone who doesn't have a clue about any of this stuff can still use your script and adjust it however they want. Now, the final purpose of providing user input settings is to define the specifications of your script. So for example, you might want to define the default values for certain parameters in your script. Maybe you want to include minimum or maximum numbers for certain values. For example, maybe your script isn't designed to analyze price action too far into the past, so you want to include a maximum look back value, something like that. So with user inputs, you can basically set up default settings for all of your scripts, but still allow the user to adjust them if they want to. Moving on, after we get our user input, that is when I like to perform my calculations and analysis. So by calculations, I mean things like calculating stop loss and take profit distances, for example. And for analysis, I mean like detecting candlestick patterns and market conditions and so on. So this is the core logic of your script. This is the core of your script, the heart and soul of your script. This is the bulk of your code, and it is usually the middle section of your script. This is where we use our user inputs to perform calculations, load other indicators that we need. So for example, if your script uses the RSI, you'll need to get your RSI value, the current RSI value on the current bar, before you can start calculating any values or performing analysis. I like to do this after getting my user input. And basically this part of your script, this part of the anatomy of your script, contains all of your logic, your formulas, your analysis. So this is where we detect patterns, candlestick patterns, indicator patterns, price action setups, market conditions. This is where we manage our trades, for example, if we're working with a strategy tester script. And this is also where we trigger any alerts that are required for third-party APIs, in other words, automated trading. This is a very advanced subject that comes with a lot of danger and risk if you are inexperienced. So we will cover this at the end of the mastery course, but during your analysis, you may need to trigger some alerts to send commands to a third-party API, like Pine Connector, for example, which is a MetaTrader expert advisor that receives your TradingView alerts and then manages trades based on the commands that you give it. So that is the core of our script, our core script logic section. After we've done all of that, the final step of our script is basically to just draw our analysis onto our chart. So if we're detecting candlestick patterns, we want to maybe highlight that pattern, draw an arrow above or below it, depending on whether it's a long or short signal. Maybe we want to also draw stop losses, take profits onto the chart. Any of that sort of thing, I like to do at the end of my script. So our outputs can be visual drawings. They could be numerical values, like I just said, stop loss, take profit values. They could also be colorization. Maybe you just want to change the background color of your chart based on certain market conditions. A good example of this would be something like a regime filter, it's called, where maybe if price action is trading below the 50 EMA or whatever moving average you prefer, your chart turns red, and that means that you only take short trades on your trading time frame or lower time frames. And when price is above that moving average, it turns green. So in stocks, maybe if you're a long-only investor or trader, you could create a script that will tell you when to take long trades and when to stand aside using colorization of your chart. For example, there are many, many different things we can do with our script outputs. And then finally, after I've drawn all of my data onto my chart, I like to trigger any alert conditions that did not need to be triggered during my analysis. I like to keep my alerts at the bottom of my script if I can, so that all of my script logic is performed, all of my analysis, my calculations, all of that is done. We've drawn it to the chart, and now we can trigger any alerts that we want to include in our script. Now, there are a couple of options we have when working with alerts. There are two different ways we can fire alerts in our scripts. I'll cover that in the alert lesson in the next section of the course. And then finally, after triggering any alert conditions, I like to manage my tester trades if I'm working with a strategy script. Now, it's not always possible to manage my strategy trades at the end of my script, but when I can, I like to do it there for the same reasons as I mentioned with the alerts. At the end of our script, we can be certain that all of our calculation, all of our analysis has been done. And now we can safely trigger alerts or manage trades based on that information. So that's basically it for the anatomy of our scripts. That's a basic template and structure for our scripts. Here are some important things to take away from this. Your compiler directive and annotation function must be at the start of your script. So remember, the compiler directive is which version of PineScript you are using. That needs to be at the very, very top of your script. And your annotation function must come after the compiler directive, because the annotation function is what tells PineScript what style or what type of script you are working with. So again, that's indicator scripts, strategy scripts, or library scripts. Next up, our plots and drawings must be after our calculations and analysis. Obviously, because we can't plot something we haven't already analyzed or calculated. But you'll be surprised, sometimes you might accidentally try to plot something that you haven't finished calculating, and you'll get all kinds of issues if you do that. That's why I like to draw my data to the chart towards the bottom of my script when I can. Everything else in your script can basically go wherever and in whatever order you prefer. So you don't need to follow this anatomy that I've laid out here, this structure for your scripts. It's completely optional. This is just how I like to do things. I like to be consistent with my trading and my coding. And when working with PineScript, I like to structure my scripts this way. It's familiar to me. It makes it easier to modify scripts, fix bugs, add improvements or new features, and so on. It just keeps the script organized. I know that if I have a problem with my drawings, then I just need to scroll down to the bottom of my script and have a look at that code. If I have an issue with my candlestick pattern detection, I usually have a whole section just for that. So if I detect multiple candlestick patterns, I'll include all of that code in one section of my script so that I can adjust that code really quickly and efficiently if I need to. And so even though you can put your code wherever you want, so you could get user input in the middle of your script, for example, if you wanted to, but I think it's good practice to separate your code into sections. So for example, once you've set up your compiler directive and defined what type of script you're working with, so like an indicator script, for example, then I think it's a good idea to get your user input first. Keep all of that code together so it's easy to adjust if you need to. It keeps your script organized. After we get user input, I like to define any custom functions that my script needs to use, and or import a library so we can import other scripts into our script and borrow code from those scripts. That's a more advanced thing that we'll cover in future lessons. But after getting my user input, that is where I like to define custom functions. Custom functions is another thing we'll cover in detail in a future lesson. Basically the same way we can use the RSI function to get the RSI value from PineScript without having to write out all of the RSI formula in our code. We can write our own functions that do calculations and analysis on price data, and then we can use them in our script the same way we use the inbuilt functions that PineScript have to offer, and there are hundreds of them. So it's not often you need to write custom functions, but the option is there if you need to. And I like to do that towards the top of my script as well. In PineScript, you need to define your custom functions before you use them. And so it's just generally good practice to do that at the top of your script. But sometimes your functions will require user input. So that's why I like to do it after the user input code. And then finally, you just perform your calculations. Once you've got your user input, you've got your custom functions or libraries imported, you've got all the information you need to begin performing analysis. So that's what I like to do next in my scripts. And then finally, I like to output any data that is important to be displayed. And I like to trigger alerts if my script has alert functionality. So that's the general structure of a script. Now, the final important conclusion or summary point that I want to make here is that you should make sure to heavily comment all of your code in each section. I'll be explaining comments in the next section of the course. They're quite simple to understand. Basically, you just put 2 forward slashes in a row in front of the line of code you're working on, and then you can write anything that is a note to yourself or to other coders. So if you publicly publish your script, it's extremely, extremely helpful to include detailed comments that explain what your code does and your thought process behind the decisions you made with your code. I can't tell you how many times traders send me scripts and ask me to analyze them or help them with a problem with their script or try to understand the script better. And when I open it up, it just looks like pure gibberish to me because there's no explanations for what the code does. And it just gives you an instant headache when you open up a long script and it has no comments in it and no explanations for what any of the code does. And then you've got to spend sometimes hours of messing around with the code to try and work out exactly what it does. This can also be a problem for yourself. There have been times when I've written scripts that I didn't adequately comment my code, and then many months or even years later, I went back to revisit the script and maybe improve it or borrow some code from it, and I couldn't remember why I did what I did, or why there was a bug in a certain area that I hadn't fixed. And so just do yourself a favor and do every other coder that reads your code a favor, and please heavily comment your scripts when appropriate. If what you're doing is completely obvious, you don't need to comment it, but it can't hurt. So I would encourage you to err more on the side of over commenting than under commenting. Anyway, that is it for the anatomy of a script. To wrap this up, I will show you a visual example in the editor of what I'm talking about regarding the various structure and templates that I like to use when working with PineScript. So here is an extremely simple script that I wrote a few years ago. This is an ATR stop loss indicator, and all it does is draw the ATR as a whole number, and then it draws a long stop loss distance in pips and a long target distance in pips, and then a short stop loss distance and a short target distance. I won't go over the logic of this script in this particular video because it's not relevant. We will break down the source code to the script in a future lesson, but for now I just want to draw your attention to the structure of the script. So the first thing to note here is we start off with our header comment, and in this header comment I have my Mozilla public license disclaimer, I have my copyright and my TradingView username and my own personal name, the last date that I updated the code to the script, which is today. I converted this from version 4 PineScript into version 5, but before then the last update was October of 2020, so it's quite an old script, this one. And we are now working with version 5 of PineScript. So here is my compiler directive, and now it's important to note that I could put this anywhere. I could put this at the top of the script if I wanted to, just as long as it occurs, this comment occurs before any code, any actual code, that will work just fine. But I like to leave mine right above my annotation function, which is this line of code here. This is my indicator annotation function. It has a title and a short title, so a long title, which is what people see when they open up the script menu here. And then the short title is what displays onto my chart. I've set overlay to false because I want this drawing into its own box. I don't want it drawing over price action. And I've set the decimal precision to 1. So we have 1 decimal place after our numbers up here. Then next I get my user input. So we have 5 lines of code here that retrieve user input that the script later uses to influence its analysis of price action. So header comment, compiler directive, annotation function, user input. Then we have the body of my script. So all of this code here that I've highlighted is the core logic of my script. So I have 2 custom functions here that I wrote. The first one converts pips into a whole number. The second custom function here converts whole numbers back into pips. Then I get my ATR value and I convert it from points into a whole number. Notice that I've heavily commented this script. I've explained my thought process in each section of code and explained in human English terms what this code does. So anyone who picks this code up, if they are at all familiar with PineScript, will be able to work out in a matter of minutes what this script does. But anyway, moving on, once I get my ATR value, I then use that indicator value to calculate my stop loss distance for long and short trades. And then finally, I plot that data to the chart. And our plots down here are what result in these numbers drawing onto my indicator values in the status bar there. And if I had alerts, this is where I would also handle my alert code. Or if this was a strategy script, I might have some strategy code down here as well. But anyway, that is it for the anatomy of a script. Every script that I write will follow this format throughout the course. And now you understand why I have the coding habits I have in PineScript. And I look forward to you joining me in this adventure, creating awesome trading tools and strategies in the lessons to come. I hope you're excited to learn Pine because I'm excited to teach it to you. Let's move on. I'll see you in the next lesson. Take care.